I have lived in the same 4 rooms for 31 years, and in that time, I have learned everything a man can know about a building without ever truly knowing the people inside it. I knew which step on the third-floor landing creaked before dawn. I knew the smell of Mrs. Lamb's red braised pork drifting down the stairwell every Sunday, and the particular rhythm of the fan in old Mr. Fong's window. 3 slow turns. 1 fast, 3 slow again, as though it had a thought it kept interrupting. I knew all of this, and I thought it was the same as knowing the place. The night Mei Lin sat down at the piano, I understood that I had known nothing at all. It was a farewell gathering for the Chows. After 11 years on the 2nd floor, they were leaving for a flat in the new buildings across the harbor. More space, a proper kitchen, a lift that worked. Mrs. Chow had been weeping on and off since the morning, quiet kind of weeping that a person does when they are not sure whether the grief is for leaving or for the fact that they have been in one place long enough to grieve at all. Mrs. Lamb, who owned the building and every feeling that moved through it, had arranged the gathering with the brisk tenderness she brought to every difficult occasion. A folding table extended into the narrow communal sitting room. Dishes carried down from 3 different floors. The overhead light softened with a length of amber cloth draped over the shade. It was late September. The windows were open. The street outside smelled of rain that had not arrived yet. I stood near the doorway with a cup of tea I had stopped tasting, watching the room fill. There were perhaps 15 of us. Tenants, a cousin or two, the old tailor from the ground floor who I had not seen at a gathering in years. The piano stood against the far wall the way it always had. The way furniture stands in rooms where no one plays it anymore. Not quite abandoned, not quite present. A piece of the building rather than the building's life. It was an upright, dark lacquered wood gone dull. One of the lower keys slightly yellowed. Mrs. Lamb's late husband had played it, I was told, though that was before my time. Since then it had held photograph frames, a porcelain vase, a stack of old magazines that migrated from floor to floor, and always seemed to end up there as though the piano were a shore that things washed up on. Mei Lin sat down in her usual place. Not at the table, but on the small chair beside the kitchen doorway, near enough to help, and far enough to disappear. She was 27, quiet in the way that certain people are quiet not from shyness but from a habit of careful attention. She worked as an assistant to the seamstress on the floor above. And when she moved through the building, she moved as though she were trying not to disturb anything. She had lived with us for 2 years. In that time, I do not think I had heard her say more than was necessary. She smiled readily, helped without being asked, and deflect any question about her family or where she was from before, with a grace so practiced that you only noticed it after the conversation had moved on. It was Mrs. Lamb who asked her to play. Not unkindly, not even particularly deliberately, it was the way Mrs. Lamb asked things as though the decision had already been made elsewhere, and she was simply announcing it. The food was not quite ready. The room had reached that particular pitch of noise that precedes the meal, when voices overlap and no one is truly listening to anyone. Mrs. Lamb put her hand briefly on Millen's shoulder as she passed and said, almost into the air above her head, that it would be nice if there were some music, wouldn't it? And gestured at the piano with her chin, before moving back toward the kitchen. Mei Lin looked at the piano for a moment. Then she stood. I watched her cross the room. One of the cousins noticed and nudged another. The tailor looked up. Gradually, without anyone deciding to, the voices began to drop. She sat on the bench and spent a moment simply looking at the keys. Then she lifted the fallboard, that dusty panel, and set it back gently, and placed her hands on the keys without pressing them, as though she were reading something written there. I had the strange sensation of watching a person return to a place they had not been to in a very long time. Then she began to play. It was not the cheerful folk tune I imagine most of us expected. It was not a song I could have named. It began in the middle register, 3 sixths that arrived sectioned separately, and then a fourth that connected them, and from that small beginning she drew something slow and circling. Not quite a waltz, or perhaps a waltz that had learned patience, that had decided it was not in any hurry to resolve. The melody had the quality of a thing half-remembered, close enough to familiar, that it reached for something in the chest, far enough, from any specific song that you could not place it. and so could not defend yourself against it. The room went quiet, not all at once. The way a room goes quiet is never all at once, but one by one. It's like going out in a building. Mrs. Chow stopped mid-sentence. The cousins lowered their cups. The tailor, who had been looking at the floor, raised his head. I remember noticing Mrs. Lamb in the kitchen doorway, a dish towel in both hands, utterly still. Mei Lin played without looking at us. Eyes were not quite closed. They held that unfocused look of someone who has gone somewhere else, not absent but interior, attending to something the rest of us could not see. Her hands moved with a quietness that was itself a kind of statement, the phrases overlapping the way memory overlaps. One thought folding into the next before the first is finished. There was a passage in the middle where the melody rose and seemed to search, to reach toward something just out of grasp, and the left hand held steady beneath it like a hand offered to someone about to fall. Then the melody found its way down again, slower, gentler, as though whatever it had been looking for it had decided to stop looking for and simply carry. I became aware at some point that the sound had moved beyond the room. The window behind the piano was open, and the stairwell window above us was open too, and the music had gone out into that narrow shaft of evening air that connected the floors of the building. I heard a floorboard shift overhead, footsteps, slow on the stairs, then silence. Later I learned that Mr. Fong had been in his room above us when the music started, alone, as he had been almost every evening for 3 years, since the argument with his younger brother that neither of them had ever explained to anyone else. He told me, weeks afterward, over tea on the landing, that he had sat for a while trying to ignore it, and then found he was sitting at the edge of his bed, with his hands on his knees, not moving, listening in the way you listen to rain. He did not come downstairs. But when I looked up toward the landing during the second movement, I saw him there in the shadows, and standing 2 steps below him, looking up as if he had only just arrived, was his brother, come to help carry the Chow's boxes to the ferry, and had come upstairs for reasons neither of them could afterward adequately explain. They were not speaking. They were simply standing, separated by 2 steps and 3 years, listening to the same music. Mrs. Lamb wept. She wept in the still, upright way of a woman who has long practice at grief and does not wish to make a performance of it. But I saw her press the dish towel once to the corner of each eye, and then hold it balled in both hands, and not move. I had known Mrs. Lamb for 31 years. I had never seen her cry. The music shifted. A final section quieter than what came before. The melody struck back to something like a lullaby, but slower, more considered. The notes, spaced far enough apart, that the silences between them were part of the phrase. It had the feeling of a door left slightly open, of an ending that did not insist on itself. When she played the last note, Mei Lin held it for a moment. The damper pedal down, the sound blooming, and then fading into the damp September air. And then lifted her hands from the keys and folded them in her lap. No one muffed for what felt like a very long time. Then Mrs. Chow said in a voice made small by something she was working to hold back, that she did not want to leave after all, and everyone laughed, gently, unevenly, the way people laugh when the alternative is continuing to feel something too large for a room that size. And then the food came out, and the voices started up again, and the evening moved forward the way evenings do. But something had shifted. I cannot tell you exactly what. It was not the food, which was exactly the food it had always been, or the company, which was the same company it had always been. It was more that all of us for a few minutes had been permitted to remember that we were not simply adjacent to one another, that all those years, shared walls and borrowed salt and averted eyes on the stairwell had amounted to something, that the proximity had been, in spite of everything, a kind of love. Mr. Fong and his brother ate together that night. They did not discuss the argument. As far as I know, they never did. Following Sunday, the younger brother's shoes were outside the door of the 3rd floor flat, which is where shoes appear when their owner is expected for dinner, and where they have appeared most Sundays since. I asked Mei Lin, later in the evening, where she had learned to play like that. She looked at me with that gentle, deflecting smile of hers and said only that she had had a great deal of time, once in a place where there was not much else to do. I did not press her. I had been a postal clerk for 35 years, And I know what it means when a letter has already said everything it intends. Say. She moved out the following spring, upward not away, to a position with a dressmaker near the harbor, was what she had been working toward. On the morning she left, she paused at the piano and set her hand flat on its top, briefly, as though taking a temperature, or saying goodbye to someone who would not hear it. Then she picked up her case and went out into the stairwell and down. The piano still stands against the wall. The photograph frames are back on top. The magazines have found their way there again. But I do not pass it now without thinking of that evening in September, when the rain was still deciding whether to arrive, and a young woman sat down at an old upright piano and played something I have never been able to name and gave back to all of us, without knowing, or perhaps knowing exactly, the part of ourselves we had grown too careful to show. That is what music does, when it is played by someone who has kept it close through everything. It does not explain the years. It does not repair them. It simply makes them present again, and bearable, and briefly beautiful.